It has taken me roughly 9 hours to recover from the gas station wine. Got another one right here. I've been languishing this entire time, just waiting. Just waiting until I could rise once more. I think my coherency rating was actually pretty decent the first time around. I think it was a pretty decent coherency rating all the way towards the end. The thing is, though, the hardest part is sometimes I can be reading without knowing what I'm reading. And it gets me in a trance, and that's what I meant by being incoherent, because I don't even know what I'm reading. And that's bad because it makes it monotonous. It just messes with the tone. And so I had everything together pretty well there towards the end, but I just knew it could be even better, you know. And it's okay to cut your losses. In fact, honestly, that's how you win. I love going gambling with my friends. I love seeing them lose big money. Because they could have had it. They could have had everything. But they just didn't cut their losses. Okay, cool. Oh, that is refreshing. His cage was one of several hundred suspended from a great iron column, down which poured dozens of waterfalls of blood. These fed the sea of blood below him, in which writhed thousands of bodies slick with gore. It was impossible to tell if they were in agony or in some ecstasy of worship. Demons waited among them, hulking things with red-black skin, lashing the bleeding corpses with their whips. Corpses and parts of corpses bobbed everywhere, fished out and carried away by scuttling alien creatures with lopsided, tumored forms. Slowly, the column rotated on gears that ground like thunder. The other cages had their own occupants, human prisoners, naked and weeping, old corpses, half-glimpsed freaks, either alien or mutated, all of them suspended above the titanic blood cauldron. Ulrich could hear droning alien prayers, pleading with the Emperor and the ragged breaths of dying men. Tears and blood fell in a thin drizzle. Walls of black stone rose around the column and the cauldron. Alaric looked harder and saw that it was not stone but flesh, rotted black. High above, the cliff edge was festooned with barrel-sized cages, each holding a body in an advanced state of decay. Flocks of flying creatures feasted on them. The decaying cliffs were riddled with tunnels and caves, and the beetle-like alien creatures scuttled through them, chewing at the flesh with insect-like mandibles. The sky above was indigo, almost black, shot through with red, as if the sky itself was bleeding. He was in hell. Alaric had died at the hands of Duke Venalator. Alaric had died at the hands of Duke Venalator and woken up in hell. He had failed. Everything he had ever done, ever thought, or ever said, and everything he might have ever done had lived was meaningless. He had failed as completely as it was possible to fail. Alaric slumped down onto the floor of his cage. He had never felt such despair. It was made complete by the fact that he was already dead. He could not die again, and so it would never end. However, Durandon had told him he was not dead. Durandon, a chaplain of the Grey Knights, a man he could surely trust. Alaric looked up. Through the bars, he could see the cage above. Inside was a huge humanoid form, one Alaric recognized, The huge size and surgical scars matched Alric's own. "Halvern!" cried Alric. "Brother Halvern, can you hear me? Do we yet live?" Halvern did not answer. He was presumably unconscious or dead, and like Alric, had been stripped of his war gear. Alric tried to force the bars of his cage apart, and then to rock it from side to side in hope of grabbing the gnarled metal column and climbing up to Halvern, but the cage was too strong and suspended too far out. "Halvern, brother, speak to me!" As if in response, Alaric's cage fell. Alaric kicked out in desperation as the cage plummeted towards the blood cauldron. He was slammed against the side of the cage as it hit the surface of the blood. Blood closed in all around him, and hands reached him, the skin sloughing off them. Alaric kicked at the hands of the revelers, but there were too many of them. The sound of them was horrible. Blasphemous prayers spilling from bloodied lips in 100 different languages. Something roared, and a whip cracked, and a demon threw the worshippers aside and stood over Alaric, leering. Alaric recognized its form from countless battlefields. It was a foot soldier of Khorne, a bloodletter in the jargon of the Inquisition. Alaric remembered they carried two-handed swords as weapons of choice, but this one's whip was just as cruel. Alaric recoiled as soon as the bodies were cleared of the cage. The mere presence of a Grey Knight was an anathema to the demon. Even without the pentagrammic wards built into his armor, the psychic shield around Alaric's mind pushed back against the demon's presence, with enough violence to make its skin smolder. The bloodletter snarled and lashed at the revelers around it, slicing off a hand here, a leg there, in its rage. Then it grabbed the bars of the cage with one hand and dragged it through the gore towards the chasm wall. The demon hauled the cage out of the blood and into a cave opening. The smell was appalling, putrescence so heavy in the air that Alaric could see it trickling down the walls in foul condensation. Dark, twisted creatures scuttled towards him. These were not demons, but some alien species, and their skin carried the brands of manacle scars of a slave race. The aliens dragged Alaric through the stinking tunnels into a cavern that glowed with a close red heat. It was a forge, where human and alien slaves pulled glowing weapons from vats of molten metal. Other slaves were chained to anvils, their spines twisted by years of servitude, and they were beat, and here they beat into edge the sword and spear tips. The din was appalling. Alaric saw Halvern's cage being dragged through another opening, a gaggle of aliens following it. Halvern had awoken and was raging inside, trying to kick his way out of the cage. "Halvern!" shouted Alaric over the ringing of the anvils. "We are not dead! We are not dead!" A crowd of alien slaves passed around Alaric's cage as he was dragged towards one of the anvils. They were misshapen, asymmetrical creatures with a dozen eyes each, arranged without pattern around their faces, and complex mandibles that dribbled slime as they gibbered to each other in their language. A bolt was drawn back somewhere, and the top of the cage was swung open. Alaric tried to force his way out, but shock prods were jabbed down at him. His own strength was turned back to him as he spasmed. A single shock prod with a semicircular head was pressed down against his torso, and he was pinned in place. His muscles were paralyzed, save for the involuntary convulsions, and though he fought against it with everything he had left, he couldn't break free. At full strength, he would have thrown the aliens out of his way, grabbed a weapon fresh from the anvil, and killed everything he saw. But he was wounded and exhausted. He did not give in. He could not. But in the back of his mind, a voice told him that it was futile. One of the aliens, larger and darker skinned than the rest, and evidently in charge, reached a pair of tongs into the closest forge. It withdrew a circle of glowing metal. It was hinged to one side so it hung open. It was a collar. The alien leaned over Alaric. Its caustic spittle dribbled over into the chest. "Rejoice!" said the alien forge master, its imperial Gothic thick and slurred through mandibles. For this shall make you holy! The alien plunged the collar down onto Alaric's throat. It snickered shut around the back of his neck. His skin hissed as it cooked under the hot metal. Alaric could struggle no more. His mind felt as if it was suddenly frozen. He realized what had been done to him. He knew, for perhaps the first time, what fear was. Many freaks. I like the freaks. It's just such a constant presentation of freaks. And of course, they have wacky occupations. The collar guys, they like the collars. Oh, my fucking nose. Why does it itch? The human species was evolving. This was a truth the Inquisition went to great pains to suppress, but it could not be denied by the Inquisitors themselves. Some even held the heretical belief that the Emperor planned to shepherd this evolution onwards and help the human race achieve its potential. The emergence of psychic humans created one of the critical tasks of the Inquisition: the identification, imprisonment, and liquidation of emerging psychers. Every planetary governor was under pain of death to hand over all the psychers collected by his forces whenever the Inquisition and its black ships came calling. What happened to the great majority of psychers herded into those black ships, only those sworn to secrecy know for sure. A few of the psychers, perhaps 1 in 10 or less, were strong and adaptable enough to be properly trained. An untrained psyker was a dangerous thing, an unguarded mind through which all manner of horrors could gain entry to the worlds of the Imperium. However, a properly trained psyker could guard his mind against such threats, and sometimes even make his mind far stronger than those of his fellow men. It was an irony, often a cruel one, that such trained psychers were essential to the functioning of the Imperium. They were the astropaths, whose arcane long-range telepathy made interstellar communications possible, the soothsayers, whose skill with the Emperor's tarot enabled them to advise on the vagaries of the future. Many Imperial citizens viewed even these sanctioned psychers with fear. Yet, in spite of the fear that followed the psyker everywhere, without him the Imperium could not function. To most citizens, a psyker was a witch, a rogue prowling the shadows of the Imperium's worlds to corrupt interfering minds or bring forth foul things from the warp. A child foolish enough to display an unusual talent for magic tricks could expect his friends or family to turn him over to the local clergy. Wise women and fortune tellers were burned at the stake on backwater worlds where Imperial servants rarely visited. Spaceship crews swapped tall tales of night-skinned humans who could rip a man's mind out of his skull, shape changers, fire breathers, and stranger things besides. Once, long ago, a time before he could remember, anything at all, Alaric had been one of those witches. Alaric was a psyker. All Grey Knights were. While most Space Marine chapters made use of some psykers, only the Grey Knights required psychic potential from all their recruits. It was what made the Grey Knights capable of fighting the demon, for a demon's most potent weapons threatened the soul itself. Demons brought with them corruption, and fighting them exposed the Grey Knight to that corruption. They were trained to resist and taught prayers of willpower so potent they drove some recruits mad. Their armor was impregnated with sigils against the powers of the warp. The same symbols tattooed their skins that their bodies were shielded against corruption. But the most powerful defense was a Grey Knight's psychic shield. Alaric had been taught, in the very earliest stages of his training, to imprison his soul in a cage of faith and contempt where no demon could reach it. It was the only weapon a demon truly feared, an incorruptible mind, anathema to the warp. The mere existence of the Grey Knights was a victory of sorts against chaos. The collar fixed around Alaric's neck was a dead, heavy thing that weighed down Alaric's soul. It was an artifact of Khorne, the blood god. The blood god despised sorcery, and it despised the righteous, holy mind of a Grey Knight. The collar of Khorne suppressed psychic abilities. Alaric's shield was gone. He was still a Grey Knight. He still trained his mind and his body beyond a normal man's tolerances against corruption and possession, but without the psychic shield, he was ultimately defenseless. There are many psychic shields we can put around our minds, friend. The thing is willpower is, in many cases, it's hard to notice its absence. There's no bonus for breaking the veil between reality and what's on the other side. It makes you weaker. So you must be ready to never put yourself in a position of unstrength. I consumed, oh gosh, I consumed a great quantity of food today. A great quantity of food was consumed today. The word lopsided was said in the book several times. Hey! You are a harbinger of disease, creature. Our alliance is merely one of opportunity. I'm attempting to do activities balancing toxins with toxins. It was a long time before Alric could feel anything. He was somewhere infernally hot. Alric was standing, and he was chained to the wall. The chamber was lit by ruddy furnaces, taking up the opposite wall. Unfinished swords and sections of power armor were heaped up either side of a well-scored anvil. "You're not supposed to wake up for a good while," said a voice behind Alric. Alric turned, but he was chained in place. He was dimly aware that he was still in the forge where his collar had been attached, and the iron weight of it around his neck seemed to drag him down towards the floor. "Where is my battle brother?" asked Alric through split and bloody lips. "I heard there were two of you," said the voice. It was deep and gravelly, from a throat scorched by years amid the forges. "He's somewhere in this hole, probably having the collar fixed. They had you down as witches as soon as they brought you in. Not many get the collar, you know. It's quite an honor." The speaker walked to the anvil. His back was to Alric. He was a massive man with brawny shoulders and dark skin that gleamed like bronze. Tools hung from his waist. He bent over the anvil and picked up a sword, a magnificent blade, but tough and half finished. "I have been down here a long time," he continued. "Heard a lot of things, but it's got to be a long time since the Astartes graced this world. A long time indeed." "Who are you?" The speaker did not look around. "A smith by trade. Too useful a man to kill. I guess I should thank the Emperor for that. There's one thing that this planet needs, Astartes, it's blades, good blades, and lots of them. So this is where I shall stay until I die, and probably well beyond, making their blades. Perhaps you'll end up with one of mine. Believe me, you'll know it. There are no blades like it on this world." "Where am I to be taken? What will happen to me?" The smith did not turn to face Alric. The muscles on his back snaked beneath dark skin as he laid out the sword on the anvil and took up a hammer. "Not for me to say, Astartes. Not for me to say. If I had anything worthwhile to my name, though, I'd wager it on fighting for your life sooner rather than later. So I'll make you a deal." Alric laughed, and it sounded bitter as the taste of blood in his mouth. "A deal, of course. Ah, hear me out, Astartes. Unless you have somewhere better to be." Involuntarily, Alric fought against his chains. "I'll make you a suit of armor," said the smith. "The best you've ever held." "I have armor." "Not anymore. And you've never had armor such as I can craft. Fits like a steel skin. Bends like silk. Toughened by fires as fierce as the heart of a star. Strong enough to turn Korn's axe aside. How does that sound? Tempting? But it will not be for free. I know you're kind. Any promise from the corrupted is as good as a betrayal. Oh, no, no. You do not understand. In return, I ask that you seek something out for me. I dare say you have more luck finding it out in the world than I will have down here." "In this," said Alric, "no servant of the Emperor would bargain with one such as you." "Such as me? And what am I?" The smith turned just enough for Alric to see his face in profile. His face was as beaten as one of his blades, his nose broken many times, his eyes almost hidden in scar tissue. "Find the hammer, Astartes. The hammer of demons. They say it lies somewhere on this world, and with it a hero will rise up and topple the lords of the blood god. What would be dearer to a slave like me than to see that? Lies. The hammer of demons is very real. Nothing more is known of it, but it most definitely lies somewhere on this planet. If I didn't know better, I might even say that it's right before me, chained to a wall in my forge. For you are the hammer. Is that not to say, Grey Knight? The weight of the collar was too much for Alric to bear. His head bowed as it dragged him down. Black spots flickered before the forge flames, and he smelled burning iron and bolter smoke. He drifted back out of consciousness, lulled into oblivion by the ringing of the smith's hammer on the anvil. This next part is pretty wacky. Yeah, it has to be read in a really weird way. Yeah, I think that's the key here, is making the next part really weird. Carnical, that self-devouring beast, that tumor city, that cancerous glory, a great parasite oozed from the black of the earth. Some say Carnical plummeted to tracks from Drakazi from some distant star and grew mindless and vast over the eons. Others claim it as some native thing from fungus or parasite mutated to immense dimensions by the ever-present power of chaos. What fools are they to seek logic in its form, the caverns of its entrails, the blood rivers oozing from its wounds, the groaning of its eternal pain. These are a few face of chaos, a face of corn. The city built across Carnical is a parasite upon a parasite, shanties crammed between the fatty folds of its back, spires tumbling at the whim of the beast, temples and slaughterhouses heaving with its titanic breath. All this whim of the mindless thing, the idiot monstrosity, the city monster that is Carnical. Mind Journeys of a Heretic Saint by Inquisitor Hilmander Oswin. Man, they just send these like inquisitors on these like scribe missions. It seems because this one and then Maladrax, yeah, it just I'm fairly certain that they both knew madness would happen, but they could leave behind these wacky tomes that would just really make someone's day. Lysander liked reading it. I like, reading this. I mean, if he does this all just to be foreshadowing or like expository, then good on him. Really, that's some real that's cool. Good crop this year, said Lord Ebendrake. Indeed, my lord. Oh, indeed, my lord, replied Duke Duke Venalator. Duke Venalator. Indeed, my lord, replied Duke Venalator. Corn will be pleased to see them die. The tortured garden gave Venalator and Ebendrake an excellent view of Carnical's slave market. The market was one of the largest on Drakazi. It was built into the side of the dried out cyst like a meteor crater. Hundreds of slavers' blocks were embedded in the tough skin of the ground, each one with several new slaves chained to it. The shouting of slavers rang out, punctuated by the sound of whips and cracking bones. Lord Ebendrake flexed the claw idly. like a stretching cat. The warp speaks of you, Venalator. Then I am blessed, my lord. It says you have brought the blood god a very particular prize. Venalator bowed. It is true, the Imperials fought at Sarthas Majoris. They were swept aside, and many were taken alive. More than just guardsmen, though. So the seers say. You shall see, my lord. Evan Drake padded to the edge of the torture garden's balcony. The garden was a place of reflection for Carnicail's elite, where they could consider the dismembered bodies displayed where they had died on the intricate torture devices arranged on the obsidian. A rebel might be granted a final honor in death, to be slowly tormented on a frame of silver, to serve as inspiration for the garden's visitors. Lord Ebendrake was a huge reptilian creature. He bore a resemblance to the dragons of various human myths, and perhaps this was not a coincidence, since Ebendrake had presumably chosen his form at some point in his distant past. He had scales of jet black, yellow feline eyes, and countless bony spines, on which were sometimes mounted the heads and hands of those who had displeased him. Long, sinuous body and enormous wings moved with speed and grace alien to his size, and he brought with him a majesty that marked him out instantly as the de facto ruler of Drakasi. For the occasion, Lord Ebendrake wore armor of obsidian and brass, cladding his massive scaly body in a way that echoed the stern armor of his personal troops, the Ophidian Guard. He was accompanied by a detachment of these elite armored warriors who followed their master at a respectful distance. They were the most powerful fighting force on Jakazi, with their black and venom blades and eyeless helms. Their presence was a constant reminder that strength at arms was the ultimate decider in Jakazi's power struggles. I have no doubt there are rumors, said Ebendrake, of where my role shall take us next. Venalator weighed his words carefully for a moment. One hears things. I am aware of a great undertaking. We have stayed on this world too long, said Ebendrake. He stretched out his wings as if indicating the expanse of Jakazi's bloodshot sky. This filthy rock, this lump of bloody dirt, it is too small a place to contain the worship due to our god. Do you not agree? This is a fine world, said Venaltor simply, but there is always room for more blood. Ha! Have some imagination, Duke. Think what we could do. We leave Jakasi only to enslave, and return our captives to this world to watch them die. On Sarthas Majoris, you did just that. However, if all Jakasi's lords made a common cause and took our best followers out of the stars, whole worlds could fall to us. Jakasi will be a monument to our bloodshed. You speak, said Venelator, of a crusade. Of course. Even now, only the one they call the Despoiler leads his armies out of the eye. Countless other champions of the warp are doing the same all across the galaxy. There are rich pickings in the wake of such bloodshed. The blood god's own crusade can only grow as more fall to our cause. By the time we return to Kasi, the blood god will have his own empire in the eye. Would that not stand as a greater monument than all our games put together? I can see it, my lord, said Venelator, letting an edge of wonder into his voice. No, Duke, said Ebendrake. You are young. You have not fought long under Korn's banner. What you see is just the beginning. It takes this ancient creature to understand what Jakasi could truly be. Soon all the lords will know of my crusade, and they will be united under me. For now, there are more pressing matters. You say you made a fine haul at Sarthus Majoris. Venaltor followed Ebendrake's gaze down over the market. Thousands of captives were for sale, some of them from Venaltor's recent victory, others handed over in tribute to Khorne by pirate raiders or captured in battles across the Eye of Terror. Most of them were human, for the human forces of the Imperium were battling the servants of chaos throughout the Eye. Some others were aliens, slender Eldar, orcs, a few strange creatures plucked from the far corners of space. Come, said Venaltor, I have wares to show. Together, Lord Ebendrake and Venaltor descended the winding stairway down to the sixth floor. Everywhere there went slavers, all servants, one of Jocasi's lords, bowed or saluted at Ebendrake's presence. The wretches who inhabited Carnical scurried away in fear or prostrated themselves on the ground, whimpering and pathetic. Most of Jocasi's population was human, or at least originally human, and some said Ebendrake had taken on his draconic forms solely to mark himself apart from the scum of the planet's cities. The sounds and smells of the slave market crowded all around, sweat and misery mingling with the heavy rotting stench of Carnical itself. Many of Jocasi's other lords were examining the slaves on offer. Tyresia, tall and ebony-skinned, with a great longbow carried at her side, was picking out new quarries for her court of feral killers and cultured assassins to chase down in the next great hunt. Golgor the packmaster was purchasing the weakest, most pathetic slaves to be thrown to his flesh hounds, two of which he led around the market by chains. Scathach was making a rare foray from his fortress, probably to buy combat slaves to train his soldiers, and turned one of his heads to follow Ebendrake and Venaltor, making their way between the slaving blocks. Scathach had long forsaken the traitor legions, but he still wore the power armor of a Chaos Space Marine, and the soldiers who followed him formed a neat drilled regiment, quite at odds with the bloodthirsty rabble many lords gathered around themselves. Lord Ebendrake, my kind are honored, said a booming voice. Up ahead of Venaltor, there was a great cauldron of steaming blood, containing the toad-like form of a great demon. The cauldron was carried by blinded slaves, their spines horribly bent by the demon's weight. Two slaves poured ladles of blood over the demon's pasty skin as it addressed Ebendrake. On the demon's chest, there was a weeping scab in the shape of a stylized six-fingered hand. The same symbol was branded on the chests of slaves who carried the demon. Aguthrax, what manner of sacrifices have you brought for the altars and arenas of our world? Said Ebendrake. Aguthrax waved a dripping hand towards the slaving block beside him. Dozens of bronze, muscular men and women were chained there, many still shouting curses at the slavers, watching over them. An entire tribe, my lord, said Argothrax. A most violent and savage people, yes. Their rage echoed long in the warp. They spoke unto their most ancient god, our god, and brought my servants forth. And so they were enslaved, and soon they will learn to bow before the will of their god. Ha! See how they still rage. Imagine such anger churn for the blood god's glory. More savages, Argothrax, said Ebendrake. There is always need of their kind for the arenas. The blood god ever demands this fodder. Argothrax could not keep the anger from passing over his revolting face. Then it is a blessing that the blood god will hold this offering in such high esteem. Argothrax turned his burning black eyes on Venaltor. What have you brought, upstart youth? What permits you to walk alongside our lord as an equal? Venaltor smiled. Argothrax hated him. Most of Jocasi's lords hated him, since compared to most of them, he was young and brilliant. They hated each other too, of course, and tolerated one another only because Lord Ebendrake had forged from Jocasi an immense temple to Khorne that required all their intentions to maintain. Argothrax, however, was an ancient and evil thing, spawned within the warp, harbored a particular dislike of usurpers like Venalator. "Observe, honored demon," said Venalator simply. Professor. Lashes drove human slaves out of the pavilion into the market. Oh. Venalator's servants tended a grand pavilion of crimson silk that dominated one side of the slave market. Many of his servants were scaphalids, creatures native to Drakasi, who inhabited its mountains and canyons before the first lords of chaos had set foot on the planet. They were scuttling insect things who, though despised by everything else on Drakasi, were devoted to chaos and to Venalator himself. Dozens of them scurried over the pavilion, and the largest of the number, the slave masters, swarmed around the opening to the pavilion as the silks were pulled back. Lashes drove human slaves out of the pavilion into the market. They were streaked with blood, chained together at the wrists and ankles. They were all men, and almost all of them had the same tattoo on their shoulders: Imperial Guard, soldiers of the weakling Imperium, finally reduced to the slavery that was their lot in life. "This is it," said Argothrax. "These wretches are barely fit to feed the flesh hounds. For this you waste our time? The blood god will spit upon such an offering, Venalator. Such failure is heresy." "Patience, demon," said Venalator smoothly. A quartet of scaphalid slave masters emerged, hauling thick brass chains. They dragged a hulking human form out of the pavilion, half again as tall as any of the Imperial Guardsmen. Another followed it, similarly large. Slabs of muscle rippled beneath their skin, which was streaked with grime and dried blood. Beneath the filth were scars, old battle wounds, and the marks of extensive surgery. The dark shape of the black carapace was just visible under the skin, with metallic ports in the chest and biceps where power armor could read off vital signs. One of the men had broad, expressive features and a service stud in his forehead, while the other had a face as solid and unflappable as a slab of granite. They both strained at their chains, but the metal had been forged in the hottest volcano of Drakasi's mountain ranges, and they held fast. Each man had a collar of corn around his neck, a fact that was evidently not lost on Lord Ebendrake. "Space Marines," said Ebendrake. "And alive? You have outdone yourself, Venalator. It has been many years since a living Astartes was brought to Drakasi." "Not just a space marine, my lord," said Venalator proudly. "No, psychers, sorcerers. It will please the blood god to see them die." "More than that." Venalator snapped his fingers, and a scaphalid slave master scurried up, cradling the shoulder pad from a suit of Space Marine power armor on its front legs. Venalator took the shoulder pad and held it up for Ebendrake to see the device emblazoned across it. The ceramite was deeply carved with devotional prayers in High Gothic, and it bore the symbol of a sword thrust through an open book. "A Grey Knight?" said Ebendrake. "Two Grey Knights," replied Venalator. He looked purposely at Argothrax. "Demon hunters." Argothrax sneered. He would never show obvious weakness in front of Ebendrake, and especially Venalator, but he was leaning back in his cauldron to put as much distance as he could between himself and the Grey Knights. Their very presence was an anathema to the demon, It gave Venalator savage joy to think that something like fear might be blossoming in Argothrax's corrupted mind. I take it these specimens will not be for sale, continued Evandrake. Indeed not. I myself shall see that they reap the greatest glory of corn. It is not something I can trust to another. I shall take them back to the Hectatomb and make them ready for the next games. Venalator waved a dismissive hand at the Imperial Guard prisoners. As for the rest of them, they are for sale. It is not for me to hoard the blood god sacrifices for myself. There is one thing. Slaves hauled forward a sled, on which it displayed the rest of the Grey Knight's armor. It was still stained with the blood of the Battle of Sarthus Majoris. A tribute, my lord, Argothrax snorted decisively. Gratefully received, Duke. Rare trophies indeed. Have your slaves take them to my palace. It will be done. So, said Evandrake, eyeing the Grey Knights, Carnical's games will see the hunters of the demons slaying their own for the blood god's glory. Let it not be said that Corn does not appreciate such humor. Evandrake turned and began to pad through the rest of the market to inspect the other prisoners being traded between Jacasi's lords. None of them would come close to the rare prize of a pair of Grey Knights, and no lord could boast such warriors in their arena stables. But now Tor cast Argothrax a final look before heading for the pavilion. His slave masters had much to do, for Carnical's games marked the beginning of a great season of worship in Jacasi's arenas, and the quality of Venaltor's slaves could determine how quickly he could rise to prominence among the planet's lords. With Grey Knights fighting under his banner, the games would be very good indeed for him. For his palace in the warp, Corn would be roaring in approval as the hunters of demons were sacrificed in combat for his glory. The warp would not soon forget Duke Venelator of Jacasi. Yeah. Kitty likes short rib. Kitty likes short rib. It's his new favorite thing. I'm afraid he might be abducted. What I want, yeah. Okay. You have been granted access. Kitty like short rib, my oh my. Sustenance. I think, yeah, it's going to be a long haul. Jesus. This is the Hectatomb, said Halvern. I heard one of them saying its name. One of them? The slaves? The insect things? Then what is it? A prison? A ship? Alric strained against his chains. But he knew it would be useless. He was chained to the wall of a tiny dark cell, barely big enough for him to stand hunched. The floor was crusted with old blood and covered in a layer of filthy straw. Everything stank. Men had died in these cells. Alric could just make out Halvern's outline through an iron grill in the wall. Alric had passed out some time after being presented at the slave market. It took a lot to rob a space marine of consciousness. It was surely the collar that was weakening his mind. Did you see it? What? The dragon? Yes, Alric recalled it, looming over him as if in a nightmare. It was not a dragon of all, of course. A demon was a mythological creature, a symbol. A dragon was a mythological creature, a symbol, or the name given by primitive humans to large lizards indigenous to countless inhospitable planets. I saw it, and the bloated one, the demon. Even with my mind blunted, it could not hide its nature. The knight, the one in red armor, was the one who took us at Sarthus Majoris. I saw you fight him. It was valiant, Justicar. For a few moments there was hope. Many more vermin died because of your example. Alric sighed. He bested me and took me alive. Our example has not finished yet. He was just able to make out his fellow Grey Knight's features through the grill. What of the others, the squad? Dane died, replied Halvern. I saw him go. As for Devorn Visical, I do not know. We were swapped and separated. Perhaps they were taken prisoner too, but I have not seen them. Emperor, forgive me, but I do not think Sarthus the Majoris ever had a chance. Probably not, said Alric. He could feel the cell floor tilting, and hear distant rumbling through the body of the Hectatomb. It was a ship after all, creaking as it sailed. Where do you think they are taking us? Asked Halvern. Are we to be sacrifices? Alric held up his hands, chained at the wrists. I think they have greater plans for us, said Alric. A simple knife across the throat is rarely enough to sate the blood god. They will have something more elaborate in store for us, I feel. And who do you think they are, Justicar? Alric paused for a long time. Who indeed? The very nature of chaos meant it could not be classified. In spite of the volumes of forbidden lore in the libraries in the Claudius, in spite of the learning filling the minds of inquisitors, chaos could not be divided into categories or dissected like a specimen. Chaos was strange. It was entropy and decay, but it was also an abundance of life and emotion, warped birth as well as death. Every time someone like Alaric thought they understood an enemy born of chaos, that enemy changed. Not just to confound the hunter, but because the change was part of its essence. Wherever we are, Halvern, and whoever has us, we cannot answer that question. We will never understand this place or these creatures. If we were ever to understand them, then our corruption would be complete. They can corrupt us? Yes. The collar leaves us defenseless. Not completely. We have our training, but yes, we are vulnerable. Then it could happen. Alric knew exactly what Halvern meant. No Grey Knight had ever fallen. They had died or been fully crippled, or their minds flayed away by the fear of the warp. Thousands of them, entombed in the chill vaults beneath Titan. But none had ever fallen. Alric and Halvern could be the first. It will not, said Alric. It does not matter what trinkets they use to strip us away of our defenses. We are Grey Knights. Everything else is details. I shall share in your faith then, Justicar, said Halvern. Alric couldn't tell him how convinced Halvern was. Alric wasn't even sure if he believed it. We will escape, continued Halvern. Of course, said Alric. The cell door banged open, and one of the insect slaves threw in an armful of armor and weaponry, which clattered to the floor, chainmail and a few pieces of plate, a sword and a helmet. Prepare, said the slave in its thick, drooling accent. It crammed the door shut and performed the same routine at Halvern's cell. For what? Demanded Halvern. For our executions? The slave ignored him and slammed his cell door shut. Alric could hear its talons clacking on the floor as it scuttled away. The chains around Alaric's wrists snickered away. Alric looked down at the armor heaped at his feet. He was feeling the wounds of his defeat by Venalator. A space marine healed with inhuman speed, but even so, it had only been a few days since he had nearly died on Sarthas Majoris. Now he would have to fight. What do they think they can take from us? Asked Halvern. The cell doors banged open. Other prisoners were emerging too, their manacles rattling. Alric pulled the chainmail shirt over his head and picked up the rusted sword at his feet. They want our blood, he replied. Alaric's first sight of some of the other slave gladiators came as he was herded down a narrow, dark tunnel towards the doors of bone studded with fangs. The tunnel wound through the entrails of Carnical, and through holes in the fleshy wall the city's inhabitants hooted and jeered at the men about to die. Some slaves were no more than fodder. They were dressed in rags, their heads bowed and white with fear. Others looked like they could take care of themselves, like the muscular man with the prison tattoos. They were almost all human, save for a gaggle of grunting aliens separated by the cordon of the insectoid aliens. Alric recognized the sound and smell of orcs, brutal greenskins who lived to fight. The tattooed man looked Alric up and down. You're not mutants? No, snarled Alric. The prisoner smiled. Then they're going to love killing you. Alric reached the doors. He could feel the anticipation among the other slaves. Some were terrified to the point of paralysis. Others were ready for the fight. The orcs were chanting, working themselves up for the slaughter. Doors opened. Light and the roar of an immense crowd hit Alric. The orcs shouldered their way past the guards and ran past Alric into the arena, waving their cleavers and clubs. Alric emerged onto the arena floor. There must have been hundreds of thousands of spectators cramming the cages and pins in the stands. Sunk into the flesh of the city, the arena was a stinking pit, walled with rotting flesh, from which flowed waterfalls of gore and pus. The spectators were kept in huge cages to prevent them from tearing at one another, as they brayed like animals, as they hurled filth and insults down at the arena floor. Carnival's citizens were as rotten and foul as their city. Flesh and skin hung off them, and their decomposed faces had lost all humanity. Here and there were grand galleries of marble and silk for dignitaries. Venalator would surely be there, and perhaps other lords that Alric had glimpsed at the slave market. Ranks of armored warriors separated the dignitaries from the scum. "In the name of the thrones," said Halvern. Another roar went up from the crowd. Gates of bone opened on the opposite side of the arena, across the expanse of blood-stained sand. A huge shape emerged from the darkness beyond it. It had the upper torso of a massive humanoid and the lower body of a snake. It had 4 arms, and in 2 of them it held a pair of enormous meat cleavers. The crowd brayed and screamed as it slithered out into the market. Alric's augmented eyesight picked out its roughly human face, and the forked tongue tasted the blood on the air and the garland of severed heads around its neck, and the kill tallies branded on its leathery skin. "Throne of Skulls," cursed the prison slave. "Skarhadoth." Yes, I got it. Skarhadoth. Yeah, that's a cool name. I like that name. "Throne of Skulls," cursed the prison slave. "Skarhadoth." Alric looked at him. The champion, continued the slave. "Eben Drake's own." "What's your name?" asked Alric. "Girth." "Girth." "Girth. Stay close. We'll surround it. Halvern and I will keep it at bay. The rest of you get behind it and..." Girth smiled. "It doesn't work that way." Rows of spikes, twice as tall as Alric, sprung up from the sand, dividing the arena into pins and corridors. Alric was separated from the other slaves, including Halvern. "Brother!" shouted Halvern as the din from the crowd grew. "It is bloodshed they want. If we kill anything, it will be for the glory of chaos." "True, but whatever we do, we must survive first. Fight as if the Emperor willed it, and as if..." A row of spears snickered back into the arena floor. There was now no obstacle between Halvern and Skarhadoth, the champion of Lord Ebendrake. Skarhadoth's eyes fixed on Halvern. Halvern held up his sword in guard. It wasn't anything like as potent as his nemesis weapon he carried as a Grey Knight, but anything could be lethal in a Space Marine's hand. The child was chanting Skarhadoth's name. Skarhadoth slithered towards Halvern. Skarhadoth was huge, much taller than Halvern, and its 2 empty hands pulled a pair of shields from its back. The shields were black, with the device of a white serpent, presumably the crest of Lord Ebendrake. It was fitting that Venalator should give one of the prize Grey Knights in combat to Ebendrake's champion. "Brother!" shouted Alric. "We stand together!" Alric leapt up and tried to haul himself over the dense barrier of spears. They were slick with the blood of previous combatants, and the gnarled metal bit into his hands. A great eruption of bloody sand fell over Alric. He dropped to the ground and turned to see a cage erupting from the arena floor. Inside was a hulking mutant, doubling over the confines of the cage. The cage door sprang open, and to another roar, the mutant stomped out, bellowing in rage. Alric's opponent was an abnormal construction of overlong, multi-jointed limbs that writhed like snakes, with long equine head and a single yellow eye that bled pus as it glared at Alric. In its hands was a weapon that resembled an industrial circular saw. The crowd screeched their approval as the saw tore into life, flicking shavings of steel and flecks of dried blood everywhere. Alric dropped to one knee, and then as the mutant charged, and the saw rang off the line of spears behind him. Alric rolled away as he saw the saw as the saw came down and gouged a choking spray of sand from the arena floor. He risked a glance behind him. Halvern and Skarhadoth were fighting. Skarhadoth rearing up and striking down like a cobra. Halvern fending off everything the champion threw at him with desperate swings of sword. Alric turned back to the mutant. It ripped the saw out of the ground and swung it. Alric turned it aside with a sword, snapping the blade up in the process. The crowd loved that, and the mutant did too, its deformed face splitting into a grin as it charged. Alric dropped to one knee, the saw passing just over the top of his head, and stabbed the broken sword up into the mutant's ribs. The shattered bone stump of the blade tore through the muscle and bone, and lodged there, torn from Alaric's grip as the mutant reared up in pain. It whipped its unnaturally long arms around and nearly cut Alric in two with the saw. Alric couldn't stay on the back foot. He was unarmed, and the mutant's reach was huge. It would kill him if he let it. He ducked under the arms and leapt onto it, hands reaching up to gouge at its eye and force its head around to snap its neck. The mutant was forced back onto its haunches. It wrapped an arm around Alaric's torso to lever him off, and the other hand tried to drive the saw through Alaric's back. Alaric's hand was round its throat while his other arm held off the saw. The mutant's eye bulged and turned red with frustration. Its long tongue spooled out and lashed at Alaric's face and neck like a tiny whip. Alric held on and tried to crush the bones of its neck with his fist. Whatever strange mutations it had on the inside, it's probably still needed to breathe. The mutant howled and threw Alric off with unnatural strength. Alric tried to scramble to his feet, but the mutant was on him too quickly. The saw was over his face, the blade shrieking at him, and the mutant was trying to force it down to cut his head in two. For a long, awful moment, the two wrestled, the mutant's unnatural strength against the enhanced muscle of a space marine, and Alric did not know which of them would win. Alric forced everything into pushing the saw to one side. The mutant's weight dove it past his head onto the arena floor, and the circular blade bit deep into the ground. The mutant tried to tear it out, but it was stuck too deep, and the saw's motor screeched and belched a plume of smoke and flame. The saw exploded in the mutant's hands, and the blade skipped away, ringing up the walls of the spears and ricocheting away to bury itself in the meat of Alric's shoulder. Alric forced a knee under the mutant's chest and kicked it off him. The mutant scurried back across the bloody sand, one ruined hand spraying black-green gore. Alric got onto his knees, back arched against the pain of the blade lodged in his shoulder. It was the same shoulder he had dislocated in the cage, and the pain was bad enough to gray out his vision. The crowd loved to see such gore. The other fights were similarly horrible. The orc had defeated its opponent, a crimson-skinned bestial thing, and was waving its enemy's severed head in victory. Gareth was kneeling over his opponent, a shaggy beast man with a goat's head, and was in the process of sawing off the head with a jagged knife. Alric was on his feet. The mutant was struggling to get up, blood flowing out of the stump of its missing hand. Alric reached agonizingly around and pulled the saw blade out of the shoulder. The mutant would still kill him. It had one good hand and a foul temper, and that was all it would need. But now Alric had a weapon. The mutant charged. Alric wound his arm back and threw the saw blade like a discus as hard as he could, ignoring the pain screaming from his shoulder. The blade sheared off the mutant's head. The blade sheared the mutant's head clean off. Alric sidestepped its headless body as it slammed into the spears behind it. The crowd jeered. The dead mutant that had been dispatched at the hand of a newcomer. Alric turned and looked for Halvern. The Grey Knight's fight with Skarhadoth had moved all the way back across the expanse of the arena floor, leaving a trail of bloody footprints. Halvern was covered in blood from dozens of cuts. One side of his face was cut open from brow to shin. He was losing. Skarhadoth loomed over Halvern. Halvern was striking at it with blurred speed, but Skarhadoth was just as quick, and he battled each sword blow aside with his shields. The distraction of Alric's battle was over, and every eye in the arena was fixed on Lord Ebendrake's champion as he forced the Grey Knight back step by step. Alric tried to climb the spears again. Many hands had tried to do the same, and clumps of ragged flesh still hung to the spears. Alric reached the top and tried to haul himself over the rusted points. Skarhadoth backhanded Halvern with one of the shields. Halvern sprawled onto his back. Skarhadoth dropped one of the cleavers and picked up Halvern, kicking the sword out of the Grey Knight's hand. "Brother!" yelled Alric. "I am with you! You are not alone!" He pulled himself over the spear fence and dropped down the other side of the spear tips, gouging long lines of his chest. He kicked to his feet and ran towards Skarhadoth and Halvern. Skarhadoth held Halvern over his head like a trophy. The crowd screamed. They wanted gore. They wanted cruelty. Alric had whetted their appetite, but Skarhadoth knew how to give them what they wanted. Skarhadoth had one hand around Halvern's throat and the other around his leg. He had pushed Halvern up from his head and pulled. Halvern screamed. Alric yelled in wordless desperation. His heart felt like they stopped in his chest. He watched Halvern's body come apart, torn in two by Skarhadoth. Halvern's blood poured over Skarhadoth, who basked in it. Open mouthed, Skarhadoth slithered over to the arena wall and threw the two halves of Halvern's body into the crowd. Spectators fought to tear chunks of flesh from the body. Skarhadoth brandished his bloody hands to every corner of the arena, a grin across his blood-slicked face. His eyes fixed on Alric and smiled through the blood of Alric's friend. Alric ran. Skarhadoth was more than halfway across the arena, and Alric sprinted to close the gap. Halvern was dead. The enemy had claimed a Grey Knight, and Alric had lost a friend. The hollow opening up in him could only be filled with revenge. It was not a choice he made. It was simple, and an unbreakable rule that had to be obeyed. Halvern had to be avenged. A wall of spears burst from the arena floor, right in front of Alric. Alric slammed into it, bending the spears. He grabbed them and shook them, trying to tear them out or bend them, but they held fast. Skarhadoth flourished his blood-slicked hands one time, and the crowd headed out through the arena doors. Slave creatures hauled them shut behind the champion. Slavers and armored warriors were entering the arena, hauling away bodies and manacling the surviving slaves. Several of them converged on Alric. Alric wanted to tear them apart, rip out the spears, and kick his way through the doors. He wanted to hunt down Skarhadoth and tear him apart, just as Skarhadoth had torn apart Halvern. But the sight of the closing doors had drained all the strength from him. His rage was like a great weight on him, like a curse laid on him for failing to avenge his friend. Lashes cut out into the flesh of his back. He fell onto his knees. He wanted all this to be gone. He wanted oblivion, so he didn't have to remember seeing Halvern die. He never felt so broken. The pain reached a crescendo, and then Alric didn't feel anything at all.